The Galactic Council took a single life. Earth took everything they had. The chamber had no windows. That was the first thing Ambassador Yara Solis noticed when she entered the Grand Assembly of the Galactic Cooperative. No windows, no stars, no reminder that outside this pressurized shell of politics and procedure, the universe continued to exist without asking anyone's permission. 43 species sat in concentric rings around a central dais. Their translators hummed. Their bureaucrats shuffled documents that existed only as light projections. The air smelled recycled and faintly chemical, the universal odor of compromise. Yara had been humanity's voice in this chamber for 6 years. She knew every delegate by their behavioral tells, the way the Veth tapped their secondary fingers when nervous, the way the Sorvani clicked their jaw plates before delivering bad news. She'd learned to read this room the way her grandmother had learned to read weather, not by what was said, but by what shifted in the air just before. Something was shifting now. The session was supposed to be routine. Territorial boundary confirmation in the Kepler reach. Standard ratification. Humanity had surveyed 3 systems in that corridor over the past decade. Quiet work, unglamorous work, the kind of cartography that never made headlines but built the infrastructure of civilization. The data was submitted. The formal request for provisional stewardship sat before the assembly. Yara had done this 4 times before. It always passed. Delegate Murin of the Sorvani hegemony rose first. He was tall by any species measure, nearly 3 meters, with a cranial structure that suggested evolutionary origins and heavy gravity. He spoke slowly, which was not unusual. He always spoke slowly. The Sorvani hegemony moves to table the territorial ratification for the Kepler Reach corridor. Yara's stylus stopped moving. Table meant delay. Delay meant review. Review, in cooperative language, meant someone had already decided the answer was no and was building the architecture of that no before announcing it. Grounds? The assembly moderator asked. Humanitarian concern, Murin said. Specifically, the Dren. The Dren. Yara kept her face still. The Dren were a pre-contact civilization in the outer band of the second Kepler system. Small population. Roughly 6 million. Pre-industrial, by galactic standards, they'd achieved basic atmospheric flight and radio communication about 40 years ago. Under cooperative law, pre-contact civilizations in surveyed space triggered a protection provision. The surveying species had to demonstrate they posed no developmental risk before stewardship was granted. It was a legitimate provision. Yara believed in it genuinely. Humanity had written much of it. Humanity fully supports Dren protection protocols, she said, standing. Our survey teams maintain distance parameters throughout. We have 0 contact incidents on record. That is accurate, Murin agreed. However, the hegemony has concerns about long-term intent. There it was. Not procedure. Intent. The Kepler corridor sits adjacent to 3 Sorvani commercial lanes, Yara said, keeping her voice neutral. I want to note that for the record. Noted, the moderator said in a tone that meant it won't matter. The vote was called 2 hours later, after testimony Yara could only describe as theater, delegates speaking not to persuade but to perform concern for audiences back home. The ratification failed, 14-29. Humanity's stewardship claim was denied. The corridor was reclassified as a cooperative shared zone, administered by a committee that, by structural coincidence, was chaired by a Sorvani representative. Yara filed the formal objection, transmitted it to Earth, and sat in her quarters that night reviewing the survey data. 6 years of work by 43 scientists, packed into a report that now belonged to no one. She thought about the Dren. 6 million people on a planet they thought was alone in the universe, looking up at stars they'd just begun to reach for. They didn't know about the cooperative. They didn't know about the vote. They didn't know their world had just become a bargaining chip. She went to sleep thinking it was, in the grand scope of things, a manageable injustice. She didn't know yet about Dr. Ian Voss. Ian Voss was 41 years old, a xenobotanist from the University of Nairobi's off-world research program, and the only human being to have ever set foot, carefully, under approved protocol, within direct observational range of a Dren settlement. He hadn't intended to. His study was atmospheric particulates in the outer band. The settlement appeared below his survey drone on day 17, a cluster of pale structures near a river delta, smoke rising from what thermal imaging suggested were communal cooking fires. He'd followed protocol exactly, cut all active emissions, gone passive observation only, logged the contact risk report, and spent the next 4 hours watching people he would never be allowed to meet go about their evening. He'd written about it once, in a paper no journal published because the sample size was one afternoon and the methodology was pure accident. But he described the way the light fell on their settlement as the sun dropped, the way the fires brightened as the sky darkened, the way it looked, from a drone at high altitude, like watching a civilization breathe. He never went back. Protocol. He was on a transit station in the Kepler Reach when the vote failed, waiting on a connecting shuttle to the second survey site, reviewing particulate data on a handheld, eating something that claimed to be a flatbread. A colleague sent him the assembly result. He read it 3 times. Then he sent a message to Ambassador Solis that she would later describe in testimony as the most quietly furious communication I have ever received from a scientist. Yara, they just handed the Dren Sky to the Sorvani. You understand what a shared zone administration means for contact timelines? They'll delay first contact protocols indefinitely. The Dren are going to develop interstellar capability in roughly 60 to 80 years. When they reach out, the first response they get will be shaped entirely by whoever manages that zone. We just lost the ability to be part of that. We lost the ability to protect them. Because of commercial lane adjacency. I need you to tell me there's an appeal pathway. Tell me something. Yara's response was honest. There was an appeal pathway. It required new evidence. It required a formal repetition. It would take at minimum 3 standard years. Ian's reply, 3 years. Right. I'll be here. He was here for 4 months before he died. The shuttle accident was logged as a navigation error, a fault in the approach vector guidance system as his transport came into dock at Survey Station Kepler 7. 14 people aboard. No survivors. The station's incident report noted debris field recovery was partial due to the approach angle. The Cooperative's Transit Authority issued a standard condolence notification. Earth received it 7 hours later. Ambassador Solis read Ian's name on the casualty list at 0340 station time, alone in her office, with the appeal petition half-drafted on the screen behind her. She sat with it for a long time. Then she opened a different channel, not the Cooperative's formal communications network, but the encrypted line that ran directly to the UN Security Council's Off-World Affairs Committee. The one reserved for matters that did not benefit from being slow. She typed 4 sentences. She did not sleep that night. By morning, Earth had begun to ask questions that the Cooperative had not expected, and was not, as it turned out, prepared to answer. The first thing Earth asked was simple. It came through official channels, a formal inquiry submitted by the United Earth Diplomatic Mission to the Cooperative's Transit Safety Bureau, stamped with the correct procedural codes, written in the flat, affectless language of bureaucratic due diligence. Ambassador Solis had drafted it herself at 0400, choosing every word with the care of someone defusing something. The United Earth Diplomatic Mission requests full telemetry records from Survey Station Kepler 7 for the 72-hour window surrounding the docking incident on stardate 7.441.22, including but not limited to approach vector guidance logs, automated navigation system states, maintenance records for the guidance array, and all communications between the station and the transport vessel during final approach. Standard. Reasonable. The kind of request any responsible government makes after losing citizens abroad. The Transit Safety Bureau responded within 6 hours, itself slightly unusual. They typically took 3 days. The response was polite, thorough in appearance and contained almost nothing useful. The approach vector logs showed a navigational anomaly consistent with equipment degradation. The guidance array had been serviced 14 months prior. The communications log between station and transport showed nothing irregular until the final 40 seconds, at which point the recording experienced what the report called a compression artifact resulting in data loss. 40 seconds of silence at the end of 14 people's lives. Yara forwarded the response to Earth with a single annotation. Note the maintenance timeline. Note what was serviced and what wasn't. Note that the guidance array was serviced by a contractor operating under a Sorvani hegemony commercial license. Earth noted it. The second question came 10 days later. This one was not filed through the Transit Safety Bureau. It came from the United Earth Science Foundation, addressed directly to the Cooperative's Research Coordination Office, requesting access to all environmental survey data collected in the Kepler Reach corridor under Shared Zone Administration, specifically any data that overlapped with the survey work conducted by Dr. Ian Voss and his team during the 4 months prior to the incident. The Research Coordination Office responded that shared zone data fell under joint administrative protocols and access requests required committee approval, which would take approximately 8 to 12 months. Earth thanked them for the timeline and filed a parallel request under a rarely invoked provision of the Cooperative Founding Charter, Article 7, Subsection 4, which granted any member species the right to audit research data in which their own citizens had participated, within a period of 5 years of that participation. Dr. Voss had participated in the collection of that data. He was a human citizen. The provision was technically valid. The committee met 3 days later to discuss it, which told Yara that someone was paying close attention, because committees in the cooperative did not convene in 3 days unless something had alarmed them. She wasn't invited to the meeting. She found out about it through a VETH delegate named Councillor Ishari, who had been humanity's quiet ally in the assembly for 4 years and who communicated almost exclusively through indirect conversation over shared meals. There was a great deal of discussion, Ishari said, pushing a portion of something gelatinous around their plate. About precedent. What kind of precedent? Yara asked. The kind where one question leads to another. Ishari's feeding tendrils retracted slightly, their equivalent of a careful pause. The Sorvani bloc is concerned that Earth is building a case. Are they concerned because Earth might be wrong, Yara said, or because Earth might be right? Ishari didn't answer. Which was, in its way, an answer. The data access was granted under Article 7, the committee apparently concluding that blocking it would look worse than complying. Earth's scientists had the files within a week. What they found in those files took another week to process, and when the analysis came back, Yara read it standing up because she had a feeling she should be on her feet for it. Ian Voss had been meticulous. Every survey run logged, every instrument calibration recorded, every deviation from expected readings noted and annotated. He'd been building a particulate map of the outer band with the patience of someone who understood that good science was just careful looking, done long enough. On day 112 of his survey, he detected an anomaly, a dispersal pattern in the upper atmosphere of Dren's planet that didn't match natural particulate sources. The dispersion geometry suggested introduction from orbit. The chemical signature, when his instruments isolated it, matched a compound used in long-range passive surveillance systems. Someone had been seeding Dren's atmosphere with sensor particles. Watching the Dren from above, covertly, in direct violation of cooperative non-interference law. Ian had flagged it in his log as anomaly, requires escalation. Will submit formal contact risk report upon return to station. He never returned to the station. Yara read the log entry 4 times. Then she called the Security Council line again, not to type 4 sentences this time, but to speak directly to the committee chair. I need to tell you what we found, she said. And I need to tell you that whoever put those sensors in Dren's atmosphere knew that Ian Voss was going to find them. His survey path was filed with the Cooperative's Research Coordination Office 60 days before he started. Anyone with access to that office knew exactly where he'd be looking. The committee chair was quiet for a moment. You're saying? I'm saying Ian Voss didn't die because of equipment degradation, Yara said. I'm saying he died because he was about to report something that someone very much needed to stay unreported. And I'm saying that the same organization that denied humanity stewardship over a protected species, that handed administration of that species' sky to a commercial interest, also had access to our survey schedules. Another silence. What do you need? The chair asked. I need Earth to stop asking questions through channels the cooperative controls, she said. I need us to start asking them somewhere they can't edit the answers. It took 48 hours for the Security Council to authorize what Yara had requested, which was not a protest, not a sanction, not a diplomatic recall. It was an independent investigation, staffed entirely by humans. Operating outside cooperative jurisdiction on the legal grounds that the death of human citizens in circumstances suggesting criminal negligence fell under Earth's own sovereign investigative authority, a right never explicitly granted by the Cooperative Charter, but never explicitly denied either. The Sorvani bloc filed an immediate objection. Earth's legal team had anticipated every line of it. They'd been building the response for 3 weeks. The investigation began. And for the first time since Yara had walked into a chamber with no windows, she felt like the room was no longer entirely controlled by the people who'd built it. The investigators Earth sent were not soldiers. This was the first thing the cooperative's legal observers noted, with something between relief and suspicion, when the team arrived at Kepler 7 Station 6 weeks after the authorization was granted. 12 people. Mostly civilian. A forensic engineer, 2 data analysts, a propulsion system specialist, a communications expert, 3 lawyers who specialized in interspecies liability law, and a woman named Dr. Amara Osei who had spent 20 years reconstructing accident scenes for Earth's Interplanetary Transport Authority. Amara had never lost a case she'd taken to arbitration. She had also never raised her voice in a professional setting, which colleagues found either reassuring or unsettling depending on their relationship with silence. She arrived at the debris recovery site with a case of instruments and a printed photograph of Ian Voss, which she set on the workbench next to her equipment and did not explain to anyone. The station's administration had been cooperative, small c, meaning genuinely helpful rather than institutionally performative. The station chief, a Veth named Coordinator Ellis, had personal reasons for wanting answers. 2 of the 14 dead had been Veth researchers. She gave Amara's team unrestricted access to the physical debris field, such as it was, and to the station's own internal logs, which were separate from the ones submitted to the Transit Safety Bureau. "The Bureau logs and our internal logs don't match," Ellis said on the first morning, without preamble or apparent concern about what that admission implied. Amara looked up from her calibration work. "In what way?" "The Bureau log shows the guidance array experienced a cascading failure beginning approximately 90 seconds before impact. Our internal station log shows the guidance array received an external command signal 17 seconds before the cascade began." The room was quiet. "You have the command signal on record?" Amara asked. "We have the timestamp of its receipt." The signal content itself was encrypted and self-deleting, standard format for automated maintenance pings, which is presumably why it didn't trigger an alarm. Ellis' secondary fingers tapped once against her arm, the Veth equivalent of controlled agitation. Maintenance pings don't usually arrive 17 seconds before a guidance array fails. Amara's forensic engineer, a man named Tobias Wren who communicated primarily through precise, complete sentences, said, "The encryption format for automated maintenance pings is administered by the Cooperative Infrastructure Authority. Authorization to generate valid encrypted pings in that format would require either a system-level credential or a credential issued to a licensed infrastructure contractor." "Like the one that serviced this array 14 months ago," Amara said. "Yes." She wrote something in her notebook, actual paper which she preferred because it couldn't be remotely accessed, and turned back to her instruments. The investigation took 9 weeks on site. The team was methodical in a way that the station's Sorvani liaison, a delegate named Assessor Preth who arrived uninvited on day 3, clearly found unnerving. He'd expected demands, accusations, the hot, confrontational energy of a government that believed it had been wronged and wanted someone to know it immediately. What he got was quiet people measuring things. Preth filed 3 separate requests to review the investigation's interim findings, citing cooperative administrative transparency provisions. Earth's legal team denied all 3 on grounds that the investigation was operating under Earth's sovereign jurisdiction and its interim findings were classified under Earth's own security protocols until the investigation concluded. "You cannot classify findings from within cooperative space," Preth said in a meeting that Amara attended and did not speak during. "We're not classifying findings from within cooperative space," Earth's lead attorney, a thin Kenyan woman named Counselor Adiz Obi, replied. "We're classifying findings from within Earth's sovereign investigative process, which happens to be physically located in cooperative space. The distinction is legally significant. That distinction is not recognized under cooperative charter." "That's correct. It's recognized under Earth's sovereign charter, which we have never ceded to the cooperative, and which the cooperative founding document does not require us to cede." Adiz smiled, which did not reach her eyes. "If the Sorvani hegemony would like to formally challenge Earth's sovereign investigative authority, we would welcome the opportunity to litigate that question before the full assembly. We believe the record will be instructive." Preth left the meeting and didn't request another one. The investigation's final report was completed on the 63rd day. It was 412 pages long with appendices. It was transmitted simultaneously to 3 locations: the UN Security Council, the Office of Ambassador Solis, and, in a move that no one in the cooperative had anticipated and that the Sorvani Block's legal team spent 2 frantic hours trying to block, the public document repository of the Galactic Cooperative itself, where any registered member species could access it. They didn't manage to block it in time. The report's executive summary was 11 paragraphs. It established, with documented evidence, the following: that the guidance array failure at Kepler-7 was not the result of equipment degradation, that the array had received a spoofed command signal 17 seconds before the cascade, that the signal had been generated using a credential issued to an infrastructure contractor licensed under the Sorvani hegemony's commercial authority, that Dr. Ian Voss had, in the days before his death, filed a preliminary anomaly report with the cooperative. Research Coordination Office describing unauthorized sensor seeding in the atmosphere of the Dren homeworld, that the Research Coordination Office had logged receipt of this report and had not acted on it, and that the administrative access required to both receive that report and to issue contractor credentials for the Kepler-7 guidance system overlapped in a way that was, the report stated carefully, statistically inconsistent with coincidence. It did not accuse anyone by name. It did not need to. Within 24 hours of the report's publication, 7 member species had formally requested an emergency session of the Grand Assembly. Delegate Murin of the Sorvani hegemony submitted a counterstatement calling the report speculative, politically motivated, and factually incomplete. Nobody asked Yara how she felt. She was glad. She wasn't sure she could have explained it in terms the chamber would understand. The particular, cold clarity of having been right about something you wished you'd been wrong about. She thought about Ian's message. Tell me something. She had something to tell him now. It wouldn't reach him. But she thought about it anyway. The emergency session was called for the 14th day after the report's publication, which in cooperative scheduling was genuinely fast, the bureaucratic equivalent of running. 41 of the 43 member species sent their senior delegates. The 2 absences were noted in the record. The Sorvani hegemony sent Assessor Preth instead of their assembly delegate, a downgrade that was either a protest or a hedge depending on how you read it, and the Dren sent no one because they didn't know this session existed, or that anyone in this chamber was making decisions about their world. Yara had thought about that a great deal in the nights before the session. 6 million people going about their lives, farming, building, arguing, loving, looking up at stars they were slowly learning to name, while 43 other species sat in a sealed room determining their fate. She found it clarifying. It reminded her why the work mattered, when the work felt like speaking into procedural fog. She had prepared her statement carefully. She had also prepared what she thought of as the secondary statement, the one she would not read aloud, the one that lived only in the notes she'd been building since the night she read Ian's name on the casualty list. Evidence has a momentum when it's assembled completely. You don't need to push it. You just have to be willing to put it all on the table. The session opened with the standard procedural recitations. Then the moderator, a different one from the last session, Yara noticed, a Veth who'd been appointed only 3 months ago and whose reputation was for precision over accommodation, invited the opening statement from the species that had called the emergency. There were 7 species who'd called it. By convention they designated a speaker. They designated Earth. Yara walked to the central dais. The chamber was quieter than she'd ever heard it. Even the translators seemed to run at lower volume as if the room was holding something. She did not begin with the report. She began with Ian Voss. She described his work. Not the anomaly, not the finding, but the work itself. The particulate mapping. The 4 months of careful, solitary observation in the outer band. The afternoon he'd spent watching a civilization breathe from a height that kept him from interfering with it. She read the passage he'd written, the fires brightening as the sky darkened, the settlement like a living thing in the river delta. She read it because she wanted the chamber to understand what had been lost before she explained how it had been taken. Then she presented the report. Not the full 400 pages, she had 3 hours and she used them surgically. The guidance array timeline. The credential overlap. The Research Coordination Office's inaction. The atmospheric sensor data that Ian had found and logged and flagged for escalation and never lived to escalate. She didn't accuse the Sorvani hegemony by name. The report hadn't and she wouldn't. What she did was lay the facts in a sequence, with the patience of someone who understood that a room full of intelligent beings can follow a line of evidence to its conclusion without being told what conclusion to reach. The chain was complete. She let them walk it. When she finished, she said, "The United Earth diplomatic mission is not here to assign guilt in this chamber. That is a matter for cooperative judicial process, which we are formally requesting be initiated. What we are here to request, as a matter of immediate action, is the following. Suspension of Sorvani administrative authority over the Kepler shared zone pending judicial review. Independent audit of the Cooperative Research Coordination Office's handling of anomaly reports filed by non-Sorvani researchers in the past decade. And formal review of the Dren protection protocols to ensure that the species they exist to protect has not been compromised by the unauthorized sensor seeding. Documented in Dr. Voss's survey data." She paused. "We are also formally requesting that humanity's stewardship petition for the Kepler Reach corridor be reinstated and fast-tracked under emergency review, not because we believe we are owed it, but because the species on that planet deserves to have someone watching over their sky who isn't already using it for something else." She sat down. The chamber debated for 6 hours. Assessor Preth delivered a lengthy rebuttal that was thorough, technically detailed, and Yara could see it in the way delegates were listening, not believed. When you've read 400 pages of documented evidence, a rebuttal needs to be better than thorough. It needs to be true. Councillor Ishari spoke for 8 minutes and said more in those 8 minutes than anyone else said in 6 hours. They described the cooperative's founding principle, that membership was not merely access to shared resources but shared responsibility for the civilization that membership was supposed to build. They said, "We do not have to determine today whether a crime was committed. We have to determine today what kind of institution we are." The votes were not close. Judicial process, initiated 31-10. RCO audit, approved 35-6. Dren protection review, unanimous. Kepler stewardship reinstatement, 28-13. Yara noted the numbers. She noted the 13. She was already thinking about them because the work wasn't finished, it was never finished in this chamber, and the 13 would be back at the next session and the session after that with new arguments and new procedures and new ways of saying not yet and not this way. But today, 28-13. She sent a message to the UN Security Council, 4 votes. 4 wins. The judicial process is live. Kepler restored. Dren protected. The reply came back in 40 minutes from the committee chair. "How are you?" She thought about it. Then she typed, "Ask me again in a year." Outside the chamber, somewhere she couldn't see, in a direction she couldn't point to, beyond stars she'd spent years learning to navigate, 6 million people were watching their sun set and their fires come up, unaware that anything had changed. But something had changed. The judicial process moved the way institutions move when they've been embarrassed, with visible speed that concealed internal resistance. The cooperative's High Adjudication Council convened within 30 days, which was fast. It appointed a 3-delegate panel, which was standard. 2 of the 3 panelists had no direct ties to the Sorvani hegemony, which was more than Yara had privately expected. The third, a Draylon delegate named Arbiter Voskin, whose species had extensive trade relationships with the hegemony, recused himself after the first preliminary hearing, citing reasonable appearance of conflict, which Yara suspected meant someone had advised him that the evidence was too complete to survive being associated with the wrong side of it. The evidentiary phase took 4 months. During those 4 months, 3 things happened that the public record captured and 2 things happened that it didn't. The public record. The RCO audit revealed 11 additional anomaly reports, filed by researchers from 6 different species over the past 9 years, that had been received, logged, and quietly filed without escalation. 3 of those reports involved the Kepler corridor. 2 involved the Dren. The sensor seeding had been going on for longer than anyone had understood. The Sorvani had been monitoring the Dren's development for at least 7 years, almost certainly to time commercial positioning for the moment of first contact. The audit also revealed that the Cooperative Research Coordination Office had undergone a personnel restructuring 4 years prior that had, by a series of committee appointments and procedural revisions, placed 5 of its 7 senior review positions under delegates with Sorvani hegemony affiliations. Bureaucracy is slow erosion. Nobody had broken a single rule visibly. They had bent 11 of them, slightly over 9 years, until the institution that existed to protect developing civilizations had become, in a quiet and deniable way, an instrument for something else. The second public finding. The infrastructure contractor whose credentials had been used to generate the spoofed command signal at Kepler 7 was a shell entity. Its licensing paperwork was real. Its physical offices were real. Its employees were real. But its ownership structure, traced through 4 layers of commercial registration across 3 cooperative jurisdictions, terminated in an account associated with a Sorvani hegemony ministry that officially oversaw commercial shipping lane development. The Adjudication Council called this finding highly significant. In legal language, that was the equivalent of a raised voice. The things the public record didn't capture. First, 3 of the 14 people who died on the shuttle were not, strictly speaking, accidental casualties in the sense that they had been targeted. They had simply been present. Ian Voss had been targeted. The other 13 had been collateral. This distinction mattered to Yara not because it changed the crime's legal weight. It didn't, but because it meant someone had made a calculation. Someone had looked at a shuttle carrying 14 people and had decided that the operational necessity of silencing one of them outweighed the cost of the other 13. She sat with that for a long time. She didn't talk about it in her reports to Earth. She didn't need to. It was in the evidentiary record, clear as anything for anyone willing to read far enough. Second, Yara received during the 4th month of the evidentiary phase, an indirect communication through Councillor Ishari. Not a message, Ishari was too precise for anything that could be logged or traced. A conversation over a meal, the way all of Ishari's most important communications happened. There has been a discussion, Ishari said, at a level above the adjudication process. What kind of discussion? The kind that happens when a member species has been exposed in a way that threatens their standing, and they calculate that managing the exposure is preferable to allowing the process to reach its conclusions. Ishari's tendrils moved. You will likely receive a proposal. Formally submitted. Framed as a goodwill gesture. A settlement. A settlement, Ishari confirmed. It will offer compensation. Meaningful compensation, I'm told. Acknowledgement of institutional failures without direct attribution of criminal intent. Reforms to the RCO. Withdrawal from Kepler administration. Yara considered this. Everything we asked for in the session. Almost everything. Minus the criminal determination. And in exchange? The evidentiary record is sealed. The judicial process concludes without a verdict. No individual accountability. She put her fork down. They want to buy the outcome. They want to contain the damage, Ishari said carefully. There is a difference. Is there? Ishari didn't answer. Yara thought about the proposal for 3 days. She thought about what Earth needed, Kepler, the Dren protections, the RCO reforms, the precedent that this kind of quiet institutional corruption would be found and challenged. All of that was in the settlement. All of it real, binding, enforceable. She thought about what Ian needed, which was a word she was aware made no logical sense, because Ian was dead and the dead don't need things. She thought about it anyway. Then she transmitted her response to the Security Council, and the Council's response back to the channel through which the proposal had arrived. Earth does not accept sealed record resolutions in cases involving the deaths of human citizens. The evidentiary process will continue to its conclusion. We are willing to discuss remediation timelines and implementation structures for the institutional reforms as a parallel track, but criminal adjudication is not a negotiable component of our position. The Sorvani bloc had 48 hours to respond. They withdrew the settlement proposal, which meant the process continued, which meant the record stayed open, which meant everyone in the cooperative, every species, every diplomat, every legal scholar and junior analyst who followed the proceedings, would eventually be able to read exactly what had been found, exactly how it connected, exactly what had been done. And to whom? The cost of that transparency, Yara understood, was that there would be no clean ending. No moment of dramatic accountability, no single figure standing before the chamber taking the weight of it. Institutions don't work that way. People in institutions do things, and the institution disperses the responsibility until accountability becomes a philosophical question rather than a practical one. But the record would exist. Sealed records can be unsealed. Sealed records can be leaked. Sealed records are archives of things someone needed to hide. Open records are just the truth. She chose the truth. The High Adjudication Council delivered its findings on a Tuesday, not that the day of the week meant much at this distance from Earth, but Yara marked it anyway. Some habits of mind are worth keeping. The chamber was not at full assembly for the reading. Adjudication verdicts were technically administrative rather than legislative, which meant the full 43 species gallery wasn't required. Perhaps 30 delegates were present, plus legal observers, plus the small gallery of press credential holders from various cooperative member species news organizations. Yara sat in the Earth section alone. She'd asked for no support presence, no staff flanking her, no visual demonstration of backing. She wanted to receive the verdict as a single person receiving information, which was what it was before it became anything else. Arbiter Calith, the council's presiding member, a Draylon as it happened, not Voskeen who had recused but another, younger, who had the particular quality of appearing to feel the weight of what she was reading, delivered the findings across 90 minutes without interruption. The summary. The Adjudication Council found, by a standard of clear and convincing evidence, that the infrastructure contractor identified in the evidentiary record had operated under Sorvani hegemony ministry direction in the generation of the spoofed command signal at Kepler 7. It found that this action had directly caused the guidance array failure. It found that the guidance array failure had caused the deaths of 14 individuals, including Dr. Ian Voss of Earth. It found that senior officials of the Sorvani hegemony, unnamed in the verdict but identified by code designation in the sealed annex that Earth's legal team had full access rights to, had directed and approved both the unauthorized atmospheric sensor seeding of the Dren homeworld and the subsequent action at Kepler 7. It did not find sufficient evidence under the cooperative's criminal evidentiary standard to determine premeditated homicide as a formal charge. It found sufficient evidence to determine reckless endangerment resulting in death, which under cooperative law carried significant institutional sanction. It ordered full Sorvani withdrawal from Kepler administration, immediately and permanently. Mandatory restructuring of the Cooperative Research Coordination Office with external oversight for a minimum of 15 years. Financial reparation to the families of all 14 victims, denominated in a figure that Yara had seen in the preliminary report and that was, in practical terms, extraordinary. Formal notation in the cooperative's permanent record that the Sorvani hegemony had been found responsible for institutional corruption resulting in civilian deaths. And, in a section that Yara had not expected and that she understood immediately would be the thing historians would cite when they described this case, the Council ordered the Dren protection file to be reclassified as a priority-sensitive civilization case, the highest designation under cooperative non-interference law, with Earth named as the primary stewardship authority, subject to full Assembly confirmation, and with the Council's formal recommendation that confirmation be treated as urgent. The verdict was not a criminal conviction. Yara had understood from the beginning that it wouldn't be, because the cooperative's legal architecture was not designed to convict institutions, only to sanction them. The individuals who'd made the decisions, who'd looked at 14 people on a shuttle and made a calculation, would face hegemony internal process, which was unlikely to be severe and which Yara had no control over. That was the thing she couldn't fix. She'd known it going in. What she could fix was the record. What she could fix was the precedent. What she could fix was the Dren, or not fix exactly because nothing about the Dren was broken but protect. She could put a wall between them and the kind of quiet, patient commercial predation that treated a civilization's first contact as an asset to be positioned rather than a moment to be honored. Yara sat in the chamber after the other delegates had filed out, in the quiet that followed the reading, and thought about walls. Not barriers. Not isolation. Walls the way a good parent stands between a child and something the child doesn't know to be afraid of yet. Visible to everyone except the person being protected. A kind of love that asks nothing in return. She thought about Ian watching the fires come up from altitude, keeping his distance not because he didn't want to be there but because he understood that wanting something wasn't the same as being entitled to it. She called the Security Council. The chair picked up immediately. "We heard," the chair said. "Good. How are you?" She'd been asked that question 7 months ago and had deflected. She considered the answer now. "I'm going to file the stewardship confirmation paperwork today," she said. "I want it in before anyone thinks to complicate it." "That's not what I asked." "I know," she said. "Ask me something I know how to answer." Pause. "Then, will it hold? The verdict, the protections, will it actually hold?" "Not by itself," she said. "It never holds by itself. It holds because we don't let it stop holding. It holds because we show up to the next session and the one after and the one after that." She watched the chamber's empty seats through the transparent partition. "But the record exists now. That part holds." The stewardship confirmation came through Assembly vote 11 days later, 33-8 with 2 abstentions. The Sorvani bloc's 8 votes were consistent. Yara expected they'd be consistent at the next session too. She was already reading the agenda for the next session. 5 years later. The Dren had a word. Yara learned it from a linguist on the contact readiness team, a woman who'd spent 3 years building the translation framework from radio intercepts. That roughly meant the horizon that watches back. It was a poetic compound, the kind of word that exists in languages where people spend a lot of time looking at the sky and thinking about what might be looking at them in return. The Dren, it turned out, had been thinking about it for a while. Their radio signals had grown more sophisticated over the 5 years of humanity's stewardship watch. The early intercepts had been dense with practical transmissions, navigation, weather, commerce, the logistical chatter of a civilization building itself. But in the last 18 months, a new category had emerged. Deliberate, structured transmissions on wideband frequencies, formatted in ways that were mathematically non-random, aimed at no particular receiver, broadcast outward into the sky. They were calling. Not for help. Not with questions. The content, as best the linguist could reconstruct it, was closer to an introduction. "We are here. We are this. Here is what we have learned. Here is what we are still learning. We don't know if anyone is listening. We are speaking anyway." The contact readiness team sent the intercepts to Ambassador Solis. She was still ambassador. She'd been asked twice to step back into a senior advisory role on Earth and twice had explained, politely, that the work wasn't finished. She read the translated fragments on a Tuesday in an office that now had a window. She'd requested the window when she'd renovated the mission's quarters. She'd been told it was structurally unusual for this part of the station. She'd said she'd take the structural risk. The light through the window wasn't Sol, it was the station's star, a smaller, cooler thing that cast everything in a slightly amber register. But it was light from a star and that was enough. She read, "We don't know if anyone is listening. We are speaking anyway." She thought, "We are." The formal first contact process was still 60 years away, by the team's most optimistic projection. The Dren were progressing, they had orbital capability now, a single station, unmanned, more symbolic than functional, but present, like a civilization clearing its throat before speaking in a new register. Protocol required that Earth maintain observation distance until the Dren achieved stable interstellar communication capability, which had specific technical benchmarks, all of them reasonable, all of them designed to ensure that first contact happened between equals rather than between a child and something enormous. Yara had read the protocol documents many times. She'd also helped revise 3 sections of them, after the adjudication case had prompted a full review of how the cooperative defined and enforced protection standards. The revised protocols had passed the Assembly 29-14, she still tracked the numbers, and were now the binding standard for all 43 member species. Ian Voss's name was in the revision's preamble. She'd written it in during drafting, tucked into a sentence about the obligations owed to researchers operating under protection mandates, and nobody had challenged its inclusion. She'd been prepared with arguments. She hadn't needed them. The atmospheric sensors the Sorvani had seeded were gone, removed under the remediation order by a joint cooperative team that included, at Earth's insistence, 2 independent observers from species with no commercial stake in the Kepler corridor. The Dren's sky was clean. Their transmissions traveled outward without being intercepted, their development observed only by the minimal passive surveillance that the protection protocol authorized and which Yara reviewed herself quarterly. She reviewed the quarterly report the morning after reading the latest intercept. Standard format, population estimates, development indicators, no contact events, no anomalies. Under the anomaly section, the contact readiness team's senior officer had added an unofficial note, not part of the formal report, just a few lines below the signature block. This week's broadband transmission was longer than previous ones. The linguistic pattern suggests they're getting more comfortable with the idea of the transmission itself. Less experimental, more deliberate. I don't have a technical metric for this, but it feels like the difference between someone shouting into a cave to hear the echo and someone speaking into it because they believe something is listening. Thought you should know. Yara folded the report and put it on her desk next to the photograph she kept there, not printed on her screen, a still from a survey drone's recording. She'd requested it from the archival logs 18 months after Ian died. The adjudication process had unlocked the survey files, and buried in them was this. A single frame high-altitude thermal overlay, a cluster of pale structures near a river delta, fires brightening as the sky darkened. She looked at it most mornings. She was going to look at it for the rest of her career, she suspected, however long that turned out to be, however many sessions remained, however many votes were close and however many were easy and however many required the kind of long, patient work that no one noticed until you could point backward and say, "Look what we built." The Dren didn't know she existed. They were broadcasting their introduction into a sky they thought was empty, hoping something was listening, not knowing that a woman in an office with a structural risk of a window was reading their words and thinking about the kind of love that asks nothing in return. They were 60 years from first contact. 60 years was a long time. It was also, Yara thought, exactly the right amount of time to do this correctly. She opened the new session agenda, a boundary dispute in the Harvan system, a commercial licensing review, a proposed amendment to the pre-contact monitoring protocol that was going to require careful reading before she decided how to vote. The work wasn't finished. She started reading. Somewhere, unreachable, uncountable light years from the nearest human being, 6 million people. 7 million now, the population estimates had updated, were looking at a sky that watched back and speaking into it with increasing confidence, their voices traveling outward at the speed of light toward a horizon they couldn't see. The horizon was watching. The horizon had teeth and history and the memory of 14 names on a casualty list. But it was also watching the way Ian had watched, from distance, with patience, with the deep and inconvenient conviction that something on the other side of that distance was worth protecting. Worth the session. Worth the vote. Worth the long, unglamorous, essential work of showing up. The stars held still. The fires came up.